It was a test, and every tear you caused was a lesson in the language of my heart. Love tests us by showing who stays when everything falls apart. It was a test, and your absence taught me the true meaning of strength and survival. Sometimes love are wanted, but one that teaches us who we really are. It was a test, and though you failed to hold my heart, I'm still learning how to love. Love's test is a quiet battle between hope and despair, and I'm still fighting. It was a test, and even in your silence, I hear the echo of the love we lost. The hardest test of love is accepting that some people are meant to stay only in memories. It was a test, and your leaving was the pain that taught me to love myself first. Love tests us with distance, doubt, and silence. But it also teaches us resilience. It was a test, and every broken promise was a lesson in what love truly isn't. Love's test is to keep believing when your heart feels like breaking into a million pieces. It was a test, and you failed to cherish what was fragile, but I'm still here. Sometimes love's test is the hardest thing we'll ever face, yet the greatest gift. It was a test, and though you walked away, my heart remains open, waiting for healing. The test of love is learning to forgive even when forgiveness feels impossible. It was a test, and your silence was the loudest answer to my unanswered questions. Love tests us by breaking down walls to reveal who we truly are beneath the pain. It was a test, and though you failed, I learned to stand tall on my own 2 feet. The hardest test of love is to hold on and let go, both at the same time. It was a test, and your choices taught me to treasure the love I give myself. Love tests us by pushing us to the edge, to see if we will break or become stronger. It was a test, and every heartbreak was the seed from which my strength grew. The test of love isn't about perfection. It's about embracing flaws and scars. It was a test, and though you left, my heart still beats with hope for what's next. Sometimes love's test reveals the cracks, but also the chance to rebuild something real. It was a test, and your failure taught me the power of self-love and healing. The hardest test of love is believing in it again after it's been broken. It was a test, and even in your absence, I hear the echoes of our once shared dreams. Love tests us by showing us our deepest fears, but also how brave we can be. It was a test, and though you stumbled, I learned how to walk on my own. The test of love is about knowing when to hold on and when to say goodbye. It was a test, and your silence taught me that some stories end in quiet sorrow. Love tests our courage, believing loving even when it hurts the most. It was a test, and I'm still here, healing, hoping, and ready to love again. The hardest test of love is forgiveness. Forgiving the person who once held your heart. It was a test, and your absence showed me that loving myself is the greatest victory. Love tests us by pushing us beyond our limits to discover new strength within. It was a test, and every tear was a step toward healing my broken heart. The test of love isn't in how it starts, but in how we grow after we fall. It was a test, and even though you left, my heart still carries your memory gently. Love tests us by breaking us open so something new and beautiful can grow. It was a test, and though you failed, I found strength in learning to love myself first. The hardest test of love is learning to trust again after the pain. It was a test, and your silence was louder than any broken promise. Love tests our patience, faith, and strength, rewarding those who never stop believing. It was a test, and though you walked away, I am still here, stronger than before. The test of love is about holding on, letting go, and knowing when to do both. It was a test, and your choices taught me that self-love is the truest form of love. Love tests us by revealing the cracks, but also the chance to repair and rebuild. It was a test, and even in your absence, I feel the echo of our love's promise. The hardest test of love is to keep believing when your heart feels shattered. It was a test, and every heartbreak was a lesson wrapped in the pain of growth. Love tests us by pushing us to the edge. It was a test, and though you left scars, I carry the lessons as a map to healing. The test of love is to forgive, heal, and open your heart again and again. It was a test, and your silence spoke louder than any word ever could. Love tests the strength of our hearts, asking if we are brave enough to love after loss. It was a test, and you may have failed, but I passed by finding my own light. The hardest test of love is to keep hoping. When everything around you says to stop, it was a test, and though you turned away, my heart refuses to stop believing in what we had. Love tests us by breaking what we thought was unbreakable and teaching us how to rebuild. It was a test, and your absence taught me the quiet strength of loving without expectation. The hardest test of love is learning to hold on without losing yourself in the process. It was a test, and even in your silence, I hear the echoes of promises never kept. Love tests not just what we give, but how much we're willing to forgive in return. It was a test, and you failed to hold my heart gently, but I am learning to hold it myself. When love becomes a test, it teaches us that sometimes the greatest victory is letting go. It was a test, and every tear was a reminder that love's depth can also bring pain. Love's true test is not in how we start, but in how we rise after we fall. It was a test, and even though you failed, my heart still whispers your name. Test of love isn't in the absence of mistakes, but in the willingness to try again. It was a test, and your choices taught me that love sometimes means choosing yourself. Love tests our patience in the hardest ways, but it also teaches us resilience and hope. It was a test, and though you broke the promise, I am still learning to keep faith. The test of love is never easy, but it is always worth fighting for when it feels real. It was a test, and every silence between us was louder than words could ever be. Love tests the strength of our hearts, asking if we are brave enough to love after loss. It was a test, and your faith and your failure taught me that some hearts are not meant to stay. If this touched your soul, don't scroll, like, comment your favorite quote, and subscribe for more. Love's test is a journey through darkness, where only the brave find the light again. It was a test, and though you forgot what we had, my heart remembers every sacred moment. Hardest test of love is learning to forgive when forgiveness feels impossible. It was a test, and your absence taught me the power of self-love and healing. Love tests us by pushing us to the edge to see if we will break or become stronger. It was a test, and the test of love isn't about perfection, but about accepting each other's flaws and scars. It was a test, and even though you walked away, my heart is still open to love's light. Love tests us by revealing the cracks, but it also gives us the chance to repair. It was a test you failed to see how deep we are not. The hardest test of love is to keep hoping when the world says to give up. It was a test, and your silence spoke louder than any word ever could. Love tests our courage, asking if we will keep loving even when it hurts the most. It was a test, and I learned that sometimes love means letting go with that grace and strength. The test of love is about holding on, letting go, and knowing when to do both. It was a test, and your choices taught me to cherish myself above all else. Love tests us by breaking us open so that something new and beautiful can grow. It was a test, and even though you failed, I passed by learning to love myself first. The hardest test of love is to forgive the person who broke your heart. It was a test, and I am still here, healing, hoping, and ready to love again. Love tests our faith, patience, and strength, and rewards those who never stop believing. It was a test, and even though you left, I'm still learning to love without fear. The test of love isn't just about two people. It's about finding peace. It was a test, and your absence was the lesson I needed to grow stronger and wiser. Love tests us by showing us our deepest fears, and teaching us to be brave anyway. It was a test, and though you stumbled, I am learning to walk on my own 2 feet. The hardest test of love is to keep your heart open when it feels like breaking. It was a test, and even in your absence, I feel the echo of our love's promise. Love tests our ability to forgive, heal, and open our hearts again and again. It was a test, and you failed. But I passed by finding my own light in the darkness. The test of love is to keep hoping when everything around you says to stop. It was a test, and your silence was louder than any broken promise. Love tests us by breaking us open to reveal who we really are beneath the pain. It was a test, and though you walked away, I am still here, stronger than before. The hardest test of love is to hold on and let go all at once. It was a test, and your choices taught me that loving myself is the greatest victory. Love tests us by pushing us to the edge to see if we will fall or fly. It was a test, and every heartbreak was a seed planted for a new beginning. The test of love is about learning to let go with grace and strength. It was a test, and you showed me that love can break us or build us stronger. I choose to rebuild with hope. They say love is a test, and you failed mine not by leaving, but by staying without heart. It was a test, and you failed to hold my heart gently, but I still believe love can heal. I thought love was easy, until you tested mine with silence, and I realized how deep it ran. It was a test of trust, and though you faltered, I learned that love is sometimes about forgiveness. You didn't just fail the test of love, you rewrote the meaning of heartbreak in my soul. It was a test, and even though you stumbled, love whispered to me that healing is possible. The test wasn't about you or me. It was about whether love could survive the storm. I'm still waiting for the calm. It was a test, and you walked away, but love stayed behind to remind me I deserve more. Love is the toughest test. It challenges us to fight for what matters, even when the world says, give up. It was a test of loyalty, and your silence broke me. Yet my heart beats on, hoping for a new beginning. They tested our love with doubt, but my heart held on to every memory like a sacred promise. It was a test, and you failed to see how much I gave. But my love remains unbroken, waiting. Love tested me with pain, but I passed by learning to love myself first. It was a test, and the hardest part wasn't losing you, but losing who I was with you. When love becomes a test, it's a chance to prove whether we are strong enough to fight or wise enough to let go. It was a test, and though your love faltered, I found strength in my own heart's quiet courage. The real test of love isn't perfection, but the willingness to grow through the broken pieces. It was a test, and your absence taught me how to fill the silence with hope instead of fear. Love is never a simple test. It's a journey of falling, failing, and rising to try again. It was a test, and even though you forgot what we promised, my heart remembers every sacred word. The hardest test of love is to keep loving when it feels like the whole world has turned away. It was a test, and your choice showed me that sometimes love is about knowing when to say goodbye. When love tests your patience, it's teaching you the power of forgiveness and the beauty of second chances. It was a test, and though you broke the silence, my heart still speaks your name with tenderness. Love tests us by showing us our deepest fears, but it also teaches us how to be brave. It was a test, and you failed to see the light I carried for you, but I won't let it dim. The test wasn't about losing you, but about finding who I am without you. It was a test, and every broken promise was a lesson wrapped in heartbreak. Love's true test is when you keep hoping, even when everything tells you to give up. It was a test, and though you left scars, I carried them out. To my healing, sometimes love tests us by pushing us to the edge to see if we will fall or fly. It was a test, and your silence spoke louder than any word ever could. The test of love isn't about who stays, but who chooses to stay despite everything. It was a test, and though you stumbled, I learned that love is also about letting go gracefully. Love tests our courage every day, to forgive, to hope, to dream again. It was a test, and the hardest lesson was learning that love alone sometimes isn't enough. When love becomes a test, It challenges us to look inside and find the strength to move forward. It was a test, and though we walked away, my heart refuses to close its door completely. Love tests us by showing the cracks, but also the chance to rebuild something stronger. It was a test, and you failed to cherish what was real, but I am learning to cherish myself. Sometimes love's test is painful, but it's the fire that purifies the heart. Was a test, and even in your absence, I feel the echo of what we once had. The test of love isn't just about the other person, it's about how deeply you can forgive yourself. It was a test, and I discovered that loving myself is the greatest victory of all. When love tests you, it's not the end, but the beginning of a new chapter. It was a test, and you may have failed, but I am still here, still hopeful, still loving. Love's test is harsh, but it reveals who we really are, beneath the pain and fear. It was a test, and your choices taught me how to find peace in letting go. The hardest test of love is to keep believing when your heart feels shattered. It was a test, and I learned that sometimes loving means saying goodbye with grace. Love tests our faith, our patience, and our willingness to forgive even when it hurts most. It was a test, and though you broke the promise, I am learning to keep mine to myself. The real test of love is not in the words but in the quiet moments that follow silence.